Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Using Michigan Newspapers for History Day Research. We're joined by Kendall Dara, from a reference librarian of Library of Michigan. And Kendall, take it away.
All right. Well, it's just the three of us. So hello, Tracy. I'm really glad that you're here today. Amy is going to put a copy of all the slides on there's a Google Drive that you can get to, I think, or she'll send it to you. So you'll have all the slides, and there are some links in here that you'll want to have later. So I hope that that's useful for you. So I'm Kendall Dara. I'm a reference librarian at the Library of Michigan, and the Library of Michigan is your state library. We serve the whole state of Michigan. And so let's get started here. Let's see. Why is it not advancing? There we go. I'd like to talk with you today about newspapers as primary sources and what they're good for. In particular, but not limited to, they give eyewitness accounts in context of their time. You can see multiple viewpoints, and you can trace the development of a subject over time. Print newspapers, some old ones do still exist, but newsprint doesn't hold up very well. And so you're not going to find a whole lot of original newspapers on paper. Sometimes they've been indexed, but not usually. So using newspapers often requires a good deal of reading. Many newspapers have been microfilmed, and so that old print on paper has been photographed, and then that goes onto a roll of film, and you can see some newsprint, a newspaper microfilm in the little picture down in the corner. The Library of Michigan has the largest collection of Michigan newspapers on film, and so they're these rolls of film, and they're really durable, so they hold up well for decades. They can be copied if you need it to make a new copy. But you have to use machinery to read them. You can't just sit there and look at the film. You can find a list of all of the titles of the newspapers we have on microfilm on our website. So you can see, do we have something that you would need? And then vertical files or clipping files, these are wonderful. Some libraries had or still have staff that clips out articles from the newspaper every day and then organizes those into folders by topic. So you don't need an index. Someone else has already gathered all kinds of articles, put them in a folder that says these are on this topic. And these can be a gold mine depending on what you're researching. Any of these articles could be photocopied, scanned, or photographed for your research. And then the golden donut are newspapers and databases, because they're just relatively easy to use. They're convenient because you can search electronically. They're convenient, especially when you can use them from home. But they do require good internet access, which is not always possible. And they usually will require some sort of identification or a library card, depending on who hosts the database. They allow for super speedy searching because you're doing it all electronically. However, there's some learning that you need to do. Each database company has a little bit different style for their searching techniques, and you need to read up on them and learn some of those skills. Otherwise, it's easy to get way too much stuff or way too little stuff. Newspaper databases can be kind of hard to find because they're so expensive. Not every library is going to have everything. They're often only available in-house. So if you're hoping to avoid a trip to the library by using a database, it's just not always possible. And you can get access to the Library of Michigan's database collection with your Library of Michigan card. Our databases are available statewide to Library of Michigan cardholders. There's no fee for your library card. You can apply at the link down there, and I'll give you a moment. So if you want to copy that down right now, you can. And then you can also find our databases at the link underneath it at the bottom of the page. So I'll give you a moment if you want to copy that down too. If you missed them, I can always give them to you again at the end. Major Michigan newspapers that we have in our databases are the Ann Arbor News, Detroit Free Press, Grand Rapids Press, Michigan Chronicle, and then we also have a Canadian paper, the Globe and Mail from Toronto. And notice the date ranges. Some of them are much longer than others. We also have some newspaper collections in databases. Oh, I see you wrote something in the chat. Thanks, Amy. Black Life in America focus is newspaper based, but it's arranged topically, which is different from all the other newspaper databases. If you're doing any research that involves Black Life in America, this is a really great resource. You search it differently. Newsbank and Newspaper Archive and newspapers.com are all different brands of databases that contain different collections of different titles of newspapers. Some are worldwide, the newspapers.com. And the others are, it's all of the US, it's kind of a hodgepodge, and you may find that you need to use more than one database to get all of the newspaper coverage you would want. And it's just not wanting to bring up my next slide.
I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. Can you go back, like maybe hit previous and then go?
Yeah, let's try. One moment, please.
Yeah.
That's. Accidentally brought up my notifications. There we go. We also have some other major newspapers. No, this is the one I already did. Did that. There are my notifications again. That's there we go. Okay, finally. And then I wanted to mention some primary source databases that we have. While these are not specifically newspaper databases, they're excellent primary source databases, and they include Ancestry Library Edition, Black Thought and Culture, and Fold3. Ancestry focuses on all sorts of things that are useful for family history research, but many of them can be used for other topics as well. So it all depends on what you're researching. That might be one you want to use. Black Thought and Culture is extensive in the types of primary sources that it contains, and it focuses on Black Thought and Culture. any Black person who's written anything. It's likely they're going to have something in there. Fold 3 focuses on military records, which can be useful for other types of research as well. And then there are some free databases online that contain digitized newspapers. The really big one is Chronicling America. This is a product of the Library of Congress, which is the nation's library. This covers newspapers from all over the US, and it has a lot of digitized content, but not everything in it is digitized. It also contains links to newspaper websites that are like current newspaper websites. And then it also is a great finding aid for if you know you need a newspaper, but you don't know where to find it. Chronicling America can help you with that. The Digital Michigan Newspaper Portal is the Michigan subset of Chronicling America, and that's run by Central Michigan University. They're wonderful. They have great librarians there too. So if you're doing anything with, if you need more help with Michigan newspapers, that's a good place to go, but you can also contact us. And then Gale in Context, Opposing Viewpoints, and Newspaper Source Plus are both newspaper collections in MEL.org, which is the Michigan Electronic Library. I'm not going to cover how to use MEL, but if you needed help with that, any librarian in Michigan can help you out with that. And we'll talk later on how to contact a librarian. Let's see. Some ways to find articles besides using the database search functions. If you're reading a book or article that has footnotes or a bibliography or works cited page, this is a great place to find out what the author of that article or book read. And often it's been newspaper articles. You can just write down those citations for those newspaper articles, and you can have a librarian help you find them so you can actually read what the author read as well. You can also find the appropriate date range, like Prohibition in Michigan and that election. I might want to just focus on 1916 from October to maybe the end of March, so I can see how things panned out at the end of the election as well. And then just focus on the newspapers that cover that time period. And I'm just scanning them for the content that I need. You can search databases like I've mentioned, and then you can also use indexes. They still exist. Libraries have them. This library has many, so we're always a good resource for indexes. Newspapers as primary sources. I mentioned the eyewitness accounts, chronology of an issue, and synchronous reporting. And I want to give you some examples of those in some research I've done. And I also want to point out that the free press means free expression and a variety of coverage. Also means you as a reader need to use good critical thinking skills to evaluate those resources. And then pre-internet and pre-television means that there were fewer forms of mass media, and newspapers were where people got their information. So you're going to find a richer content in newspapers than you would now. So Prohibition in Michigan was a big deal in 1916. There was an election about it. And these are some articles that I pulled from Microfilm. They all came from different Microfilm newspapers that we have in our collection. Most of these came from the Detroit Times, like that article in the middle. And then I also used on the far right, there's a long, tall article I used the Detroiter Abendpost, which is a German language newspaper, and I can read German, so I wanted to see what the coverage was like in that newspaper as well. And it was worth looking. The German brewers versus the evangelist prohibitionists. In that German newspaper, the brewers were not happy at all about the idea of prohibition. If you brew beer as your living and alcohol is being made illegal, you're going to have a different view. However, in Detroit, the day before the election, I think, some prominent Detroiters invited this preacher to come, this evangelist to come and preach. And he was very famous. His name was Billy Sunday. He preached all over the country, and he was also a prohibitionist. So these two articles give very different views of Billy Sunday's preaching, and the German newspaper focused a lot on how much money he brought in through this preaching. And they sum it up as at least $46,000 in 1916. That was an enormous amount of money from one preaching event. The other newspapers cover more of, how dangerous it is to have alcohol and have saloons, and it leads to crime. And then the headline towards the bottom, let people know by the way you live, you're a Christian, and just continues more of this live well, live nicely, and that alcohol is going to destroy everyone's lives. The German brewers didn't see it that way. Then there were questionable claims and hidden interests. We have this article that's got booze written across the top, and it's just a little article. It's actually an ad, and it's from an institute that the Detroit Neal Institute was an alcoholics recovery program. So it was in their interest for people not to become alcoholics, because they really saw the damage that alcoholism and alcohol addiction did to people. But even so, this little inset that I blew up seems maybe kind of questionable about one drink a day sets a man back 7% physically and weakens his memory. I would like to know how they measured those things, and what's the basis for these claims. I find them questionable. Then up at the top on the right, this vote yes for dry Michigan, better business through better men and women, vote no on home rule. I learned through reading these articles that home rule would allow each town, each city to decide, or each county to decide if they were going to have prohibition or not. So that would be complicated, but it was also controversial. Well, better just to have all or none. So SS Kresge company paid for this little ad, and Kresge is the man who started what became the Kmart Corporation. So huge retailer, and certainly he would want his employees to be reliable employees who aren't having trouble with alcohol addictions. But he would also be interested in Michiganders spending their money at his stores that did not sell alcohol rather than at the saloon or at the liquor store. So Kresge may have had some other interests. He was also one of the major people who brought in Billy Sunday to preach about prohibition. Another great way to use newspapers is to look at the history of something. And these newspapers, I took all of these articles from our database collection. And I think these are mostly Detroit papers. So the mighty long wait for the mighty Mac shows us sort of the history of the need for, the identification of a need for a bridge at the Straits of Mackinac, and how long it took and how it just kept getting postponed and postponed and postponed, and not ever really becoming a priority that got the funding. So some of the first needs for or recognition of a problem were clear by 1843, when shipping was trying to get through there. This was the way to get materials from Detroit down at the bottom of Lake Huron up to the Straits and over and down to Chicago in Lake Michigan. So you had two major cities that wanted to be able to trade, but getting stuff across the lakes was not really practical if the straits froze all the time. So there were also some articles talk about the needs for railroads. A typical spring in Michigan in 1843. This is from the article I have, just so you can see how impractical trying to ship through the straits was. March 23rd, 1843. Dear sir, I have been at this place for near 3 weeks, awaiting the first approach of spring for the purpose of fitting out. And he's a ship captain. And as yet I see no prospect of warm weather or the opening of navigation than would be in the Arctic Ocean in January. So he's not very positive about being able to actually move his ship with goods in it to do business. This article is from 40 years later and talks about the need for railroads across the state because they couldn't use the straits so much of the year. Finally, 100 years later, hunters waiting to cross the straits in ferry boats, 1947, are sick and tired of waiting to cross the straits, and they would have to wait for hours. They'd be lined up for miles to get to the Upper Peninsula to go hunting. And so this article is kind of funny because it talks about the hunters waiting in line, reading and signing the petition to finally build the bridge. But even that pressure didn't fix it until 1954. So over 100 years, construction supplies and equipment are sent from Toledo up to the Straits of Mackinac to begin the bridge, July 11th, 1954. It was a project that was over 100 years in the wanting. So you can really see a lot. And there were other interesting things related to the bridge, like people renting out summer cottages in the area so you could watch the bridge being built. You can do some neat stuff with chronological research. And then finally, different viewpoints. And this is something I really enjoyed working on this. If it's not in the newspaper, it didn't happen, right? In 1913, in the Upper Peninsula, the copper miners went on strike. And at this time, the mining companies owned the newspapers and the printing presses and the print shop and everything. And when the miners went on strike for months, the Daily Mining Gazette, which was the newspaper in the area, didn't write anything about the strike at all. There was just nothing. So after a while, the miners decided they needed to be able to communicate with the other miners and their families. And so they started their own newspaper, the Miners Bulletin. And so here we see that freedom of the press does not mean honest or fair. mining companies owned the newspapers. The news had to be approved by the mining companies, and the miners' strike was completely ignored, or the reporting was totally one-sided. And here you see a cartoon that was on the front page of the Mining Gazette, the company paper, and it shows an unemployed miner because he's striking. So looking like he's drunk and lazy, hanging out at the bar, dreaming about a nice Christmas, but not doing anything about it. So that's pretty one-sided. The Miners Bulletin provides us the miners' side of the story. The striking miners were able to start their own newspaper to inform union members about the strike and the news they needed. They had to find help outside the mining district to get the paper printed, and then they told their story their own way. And it's totally fascinating to read the Miners Bulletin to see, what was going on, at least from the miners' perspective. And this, when you read the papers, you're going to see it's totally polarized. It's very one-sided on each side, but still fascinating. The Miners Bulletin is an important paper, and it only existed for a short time until the strike was over. And it's very rare. The Library of Michigan has the only microfilm copies that I could identify that anyone could use, but the Miners Bulletin is referred to in loads of publications about the strike. So it gives you real insight, but it's a really important but rare paper.
Kendall, can I ask a question really quickly?
Yes.
That's really fascinating. And from your experience with looking at newspapers and things like that, were there many times in towns two newspapers that maybe would have those opposing viewpoints, or would be published by one group, or maybe maybe that would be in a bigger place, but where there are multiple newspapers, and looking at how they reported that story could really give you an idea of the different perspectives that people had
Sure.
about that.
Yep. Sometimes, well, in a big city like Detroit, absolutely. The Michigan Chronicle is one of the papers that we have in a database, and that is a Black-owned newspaper. And if you would like to see very different views or takes on topics, and I had wanted to include school busing in this because that was huge when I was starting school in the early 70s. And it's very, very interesting to compare the two main Detroit papers. So you've got the Free Press and the News, and they were competing viewpoints a lot. One was more Democratic and one was more Republican, or more union and more business oriented. But then to throw in the Detroit Chronicle or the Michigan Chronicle as well gives you a very different view. In the early teens, 19s, there were a lot of newspapers in Detroit, and all had very different flavors. So if you're researching something that happens at a time, it's important to see like what kind of newspapers there were that would cover your time period. And then to think about other kinds of newspapers in smaller towns, like in St. John's, Michigan, the newspaper was the Clinton County Republican. Well, there you have it. It's spelled out very clearly what their politics are, and they're still the same. And then you'd have other towns where their newspaper was called something Democrat. So definitely look at what kind of newspaper coverage is available for your time period or your event. But that brings me to the research process. This kind of work takes a lot of time. Do not wait, because sometimes you're actually researching your sources. Where am I going to find my sources before you even find the actual information you're trying to get? Like the Mining Journal or the Miners not Gazette Bulletin. Just getting your hands on that newspaper will take time if you don't know that it exists or where it exists. And most people don't find those things out until they need to. So you need to take time. You need to give yourself time because it's going to take time. And it requires detective skills. Sometimes you don't have those detective skills and you need help with that. And it also requires a lot of evaluation. If you only read the Miners Gazette or only read the Mining Bulletin or only read the Detroiter Abendpost, you're only going to get one side of the story, and it might not even be true. And you can tell by the newspaper that I have here, you might want to pay attention to what you're really looking at. But sometimes you need help, and that help is a librarian. Where are librarians when you need them? School libraries, still some schools have libraries with librarians. You might go to one of those schools. Public libraries have librarians, and you can definitely ask at your local public library. Your state library, the Library of Michigan, where I work, we would be thrilled to work with students who contact us with questions. And we are a research library. We love research. We love to help people with research. College and university libraries may be able to help you, but they may not be. Some of them will only serve their own students or faculty. So you need to know who you can rely on, and you can always rely on your state library. I'd like to cover some things like how to consult with a librarian, because people often don't know what to expect, especially when you're doing research. It's one thing to walk up to your librarian and say, I just finished this book and I really liked it and I'd like something else similar. Or I'm doing a research, I need a book about a particular topic. When you're doing the kind of research that you do for this project, you need to have a different kind of conversation with your librarian. So I want to emphasize, be prepared to speak for yourself. This is your project. This is your grade. This is your competition. This is your thing that you've created. You need to speak for yourself. Your parents cannot speak for you when you have a conference with a librarian about your project. And it's very confusing as a librarian to try to find out what the student needs while their parents keep trying to speak for them. You've got to speak for yourself. It's hard and it takes practice, and it's going to feel uncomfortable if you're not used to it, but you must do it. You must know what your assignment requires. You're the person who's been in the class. You're the person who's read over the materials and gone to meetings and discussed this with the person that you're writing it for. You need to know your assignment. If you don't really know before you come to do your research, it's really hard to actually have a direction for your research because you don't know what you're doing. So know your assignment. Bring your assignment sheets, whatever you've got, your notes, your thesis, anything. You need to know what the content is, but bring it, because sometimes there are questions the librarian's going to ask you that, well, I forgot this detail, but I can get to it. I have my stuff. Don't expect your parents to know this stuff. That's not their job. They will probably drive you places and help you get where you're going. But once you're there, having that conference with the librarian is your job. If you're looking for a specific item, like I need the miners bulletin for this date, write down as much as you can whenever you find out about the source so that we can help you find it. Sometimes it depends on what it is, but sometimes it takes some real digging. And the more information we have about this specific item or source, the better. Be prepared to answer a lot of questions. Sometimes when I'm working with a patron, they seem to feel offended that I'm asking a lot of questions, and they seem to feel like I'm getting too personal. I'm not asking personal questions. I'm asking about their research, and I'm asking the questions to help me decide what direction to take in the searching that I'm going to do to help them look for resources. It's really important to be prepared to answer those questions, because the librarian is just trying to figure out what you're telling them and understand what you're telling them, but also to clarify what you're telling them so they can help you in the direction that you need to go, and also eliminate false paths so you don't waste your time on things. Also, ask questions. If you don't know what the librarian means, you don't understand something they're talking about, please ask questions. We will probably talk with you like we talk to our adult patrons, and we expect them to feel comfortable to ask us questions if they don't know what we mean, or don't get it. So please be ready to ask questions. And finally, it is okay to call back or return to the library. I work with people who do research for years. I work with book authors and professional researchers, family researchers who spend years and years coming back looking for the next thing in their research. I don't expect you to find everything you need today and never see you again. It's very likely you'll be back because you'll read what you have. You'll find out, oh, I need some more information about this, or this wasn't the right direction. I need to change directions a bit, or there's not enough information this direction. I might have to adjust what I'm doing. That's normal. So please be prepared to call back, contact us again. It's okay. And this is how you can get in touch with us. We're here to help. You can stop in at the Library of Michigan. We're located at 702 West Kalamazoo Street in Lansing. We're in the west wing of the building, the Michigan Library and Historical Center. You can call us. There's our number, 517-335-1477. Or you can email us at librarian@michigan.gov. All of those work just fine. So I wish you all the best, and I thank you for coming to listen today. I wish you all the best in your projects, and we look forward to hearing from you with your fascinating, interesting questions and topics. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thanks, Kendall. Tracy, I don't know if you have any questions or that you want to put into any questions about that, but if you don't, maybe if you have an idea for your topic already, you could share your topic that you're thinking about. And maybe Kendall
what are you
might have some ideas. This is a great opportunity to talk with a librarian from the state of Michigan, from the state library, and see what she thinks. And I know we just had Tracy Lynn D'Angelo join the call. She's a teacher.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so Tracy, if you don't want to unmute Tracy, you can just put in the chat maybe what your topic is that you're thinking about, or if you have any interest. I know while we're waiting for that, I have a couple of questions that I thought of, Kendall. So,
Yeah.
just, Does a library provide a service for, like, if a student finds that there's a microfilm, article available, do you have to be there in person to get it? Or I sometimes libraries will do like services, you have to pay, but they'll print the article for you and send it to you. How does that work?
Every library works differently. If you know the newspaper and the date, and you contact us and you're like, yep, I saw this newspaper in your list, and I'd like this article from this date, it's very likely we can just get that for you, and we'll scan it and email it to you. We do not charge. You already paid for it in your taxes.
Mhm.
So we don't charge for our services. If you need a fishing expedition, like
Hmm.
I'm looking for an article about when the Mackinac Bridge was first built, when they first started, we just can't do that. There's not enough time and staff to be able to do that's research.
Yep.
So that's the student's job to come in and do that.
Okay, but I thought sometimes, I know if they know the exact article or the exact thing,
Yep.
it may, and other
Yep.
libraries, like you said, it depends on the library, but they could maybe contact other libraries and see if they offer that service. Because again, it never hurts to ask, you know what I mean? So,
Yep.
But yeah, and then another question I had is, you had a slide about ways to find articles.
Yes.
And under search databases, it said mel.org, and it had a colon, it said opposing viewpoints and contexts.
Yes.
Is that like a specific thing can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Do we have time? I could pull Mel up and
Sure.
show you.
Yeah, we've got time.
Okay, let's see.
Because I know that, and I really appreciate in your presentation, you talked a lot about multiple perspectives. And that is an area that a lot of times students struggle on when they're doing research and looking at that and how to look at that. I think it might be a little bit easier in this year's theme, debate and diplomacy, because you got to have those two sides.
Right.
But I think that sounds like a really promising thing that they could use.
So let's see. I'm going to share my screen and share. This is the Mel homepage. And the address for this is mel.org. I'm putting this in the chat.
Okay.
And you will need a Michigan driver's license or most public library cards. You will probably need to log in to verify that you're in Michigan to be able to use Mel, which is normal. So Mel has a lot of components. It's got two main ones. There's the MELCAT, and this is a library cross-lending program. You can borrow things from other libraries if your public library participates with Mel. This is not what I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at eResources, which is up at the top. And this is Mel's database collection. So let's take a look at that. And if you scroll down, they have things kind of grouped. This can be helpful, but if you know exactly what you're looking for, then just go to them, the eResources by letter. And Gale in context, opposing viewpoints. This used to be called just opposing points of view, I think, and they've changed the name of the database a little bit to bring their name up front. This is just a great database. It's organized by topic and it's all current issue kinds of topics, and it's really well organized. And then it takes you to an article that pulls together a lot of stuff, gives you an overview on the topic, and then shows you sources. So this is a really, really lovely thing to use. And then let me show you the other one. Let's try that.
So, and I mean, it might not work for all topics, but if you have a pretty well-known topic, this might be a great, you know, source for students to look at.
Right, absolutely. And then, what was the other one? It's newspaper source.
I think it was, what did it say? It said point, is that the Points of View Reference Center?
That's what we're in right now.
Okay.
There are like 80 some databases here, and you don't remember.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, sorry.
That's no problem. I offered.
But like, while Kendall's looking for that, as long as you are a mission or your parent, like if a student, then they can get access to these Mel resources.
Yeah. I think it's newspaper something, so. To the alphabet. Oh, there it is. Newspaper Source Plus. So it says includes millions of articles from newspapers, news wires, and news magazines. Offers television and radio transcripts, ongoing daily updates. Oh my goodness. So I have not used this one. I just know it exists. And then once you're in Mel, there are other terrific article databases that are well worth getting to know. And like here, no, if you went to the public library one, and did the general multidisciplinary, this will give you a nice collection of just good, solid research databases. And the ebook collection, some of them also include materials that would be useful for this kind of research.